We will call to order this July 27th meeting of the ACSD School Board. If we could do a round of introductions, I'll just say your first name and follow us around the little box of characters. Peter B.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Davina.
Davina Damery.
Suzanne.
Suzanne Buck.
Chip.
Chip Malcolm.
Lorraine.
Lorraine Morse.
Victoria.
Victoria Jetty.
Jory.
Tori Jacobite.
Peter C.
Peter Conlon.
Jen.
Jen Newseeder.
Will.
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Vicky.
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Mary.
Mary Gill.
Brittany.
Brittany Gilman, Business Manager.
Caitlin.
Caitlin Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Betty.
Betty Kafumbe.
Amy.
Amy McGlashan.
And I'm Mary Cullinane. As always, now we would like to offer the opportunity for anyone attending via Zoom to make public comment. Again, we just want to reiterate there has been some confusion with regards to when you click into Zoom, it gives you a message saying, please submit any questions. A reminder that those questions are specific to the Zoom meeting and any challenges in getting connected. So this time during public comment, we would like to offer the opportunity for you to raise your hand virtually, and Peter B will then provide you access. Are you seeing any hands raised, Peter?
Yep, I just invited Amy Mason in.
Oh, great. Hi, Aim.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Peter. I have to say it's really disorienting to be able to see all of you and know that you can't see me and see my eye contact and good intentions. So know that those are there. And I thank you all for being in a leadership position right now. It's a staggering thing to ask of people during a pandemic. So I just really appreciate you for all of that. I wrote my comments so I could keep it short and brief, and apologies for the reading vibe. Before I read the Harwood Union Superintendent's panicked and desperate statement yesterday, I was already planning to advocate tonight for postponing the facilities master planning process until ACSD has the capacity to engage in meaningful dialogue and access to information that will be unavailable until we're through this state of emergency. I recognize the financial uncertainty we face, but suggest that making drastic permanent systemic change amid such uncertainty is short-sighted, particularly when funding is not the only uncertainty. We don't know what the future will hold from a pandemic standpoint. We don't know who our president and governor will be and the impact that and other factors will have on the funding landscape. And we don't know how the currently booming Vermont real estate market will impact Addison County as more and more families seek to live in safer and less populated areas. At a recent meeting, our own engagement committee questioned whether the community had the bandwidth to deal with engagement opportunities, but then planned to move forward anyway. As leaders, we know constructive change happens best when it occurs with the meaningful involvement of those it will impact, and we are clearly not in a climate conducive to meaningful involvement of stakeholders, especially when we can't look in each other's eyes and understand where we're coming from. I just underline that, wanting to make eye contact with you all. So not only is large-scale change imprudent during this crisis, but the particular change the board is considering is in direct opposition to our pandemic-era needs for increased indoor space between people. Education is being reimagined with hybrid and remote learning, just two of the many changes. And we don't know yet how these changes will impact how we want to deliver education, even after the pandemic is over. So I urge you to please extend the timeline on facilities master planning to allow for real, meaningful community engagement and the gathering of all this forthcoming information we don't have access to. Given what was shared in the Harwood statement, it's clear that navigating the challenges presented by this pandemic will require laser focus on the crisis. Our central office and our school board, all of us, should use every bit of our time and energy on navigating the pandemic. Thank you all.
Thank you, Amy. Any other hands raised, Peter?
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, everyone. Steve Orzak, former board member, Middlebury resident. I've been looking through the I read the 25-page document from the state about guidelines on opening during COVID, and understand that we're starting at phase 2. I watched remotely the last school board meeting, and was a little surprised that you only spent about 20 minutes, and a good amount of that time was about what we would do in coordination with the college. Am I missing something somewhere? Is there a document that exists that talks specifically about how ACSD will be opening? I have two concerns. Number one, if I wasn't able to find it, and I guess I consider myself pretty tech savvy, how is that information being distributed to the public? We're less than a month away from opening schools, and it seems to me like that plan has not been promulgated very prominently. So I would suggest that if that plan does exist, that you might make it a little more publicly available. One thing that I did not see in any of the guidelines, either from the state or any of the literature that I read, is what about people who are in the building on an irregular basis? I'm thinking in my own personal situation about being substitutes. What are their requirements? What kind of things are going to be provided for substitutes? I saw in the guidelines that you need to be masked, and the hand washing and the rotating. That would seem to be some very specific information based on the schools that you might want to inform your substitutes about before school starts. I mean, I would think that they would need as much training as regular staff, and they're in a little bit of an awkward position in that they change classes. So if we have different setups for different situations, it might save you a bit of time, effort, and misunderstanding to have some sort of training available, or to have some sort of documentation available to people. And like I said, there are different volunteers and whatnot that come into the building that are not part of the system. They don't know how a typical day looks. Might there be some sort of document that is created, or some sort of training that is provided to people that come in on that basis? Those are just some of the observations that I wanted to make. Also, when I talked to Mary specifically about why the board meetings are not being held in a public environment, she generously informed me that there's no guidance as to whether how to get the public able to come into school buildings, because one of the guidelines is that they're not open to the public. And I was afraid, looking at the optics of that, it looked like you guys were sheltering for pandemic reasons and having the meetings on Zoom, meaning that you thought it was too dangerous to meet in person, and yet you're asking schools to start having in-person classes in less than a month. So you might want to include something somewhere that explains why the school board meetings are not happening in a public forum. But that, of course, is just a suggestion on my part. But anyway, that concludes the things that I wanted to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Hi there, this is Barb Wilson, and
Hi,
I'm
Barb.
going to talk about a different topic. First of all, I appreciated last month the discussion around taking a stand on anti-racism, but I also kind of sense, as just listening, that there was a struggle on what to do and say and that kind of thing. And what's helped me in the past is actually taking a training class and recognizing bias and what my role is in contributing towards the situation. So I really strongly recommend that maybe the board and staff actually enlist in some anti-racism training. It was part of my workplace back in the early days when affirmative action was in play, and it was very valuable. especially growing up in a lily white town in Michigan, I didn't realize, really the biases that I had. So I just recommend that wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it.
I don't see any other hands raised.
All right. Well, as always, I thank you to those folks who have taken the time to submit their comments. Right now, we're going to move on to a recommendation to approve the minutes of June 22nd. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes? Lorraine? Great. A second?
Second.
Chip? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great.
Aye.
Anyone nay? Great. The minutes have been approved. Next up is to approve the ACSD bills. Mr. Malcolm?
There's two sets, two readings of the bills. The first one on June 29th. Presumably, Victoria, you read them too. I don't see your signatures because we don't read them together, but I'm making that assumption. I didn't get anything back. Anyway, the first one, June 29th, general account total $295,145 and 82 cents. And payroll, which is a large one because it's at the end of the fiscal year, for $1,975,885.35. The second readings were on the 20th of July. General account bills, $442,847.67. Then there was a payroll related of $197,644.31. And then there were two separate checks. They're not specific, but they are written for us that we're approving. $66,910.93 and one for $117,528.24. I'm sorry I don't have the specifics on those two. I meant to talk to Melissa, but I didn't for those two. And anyway, I recommend that we pay the bills as read by myself and Victoria.
Second.
Mary, do you have a question? Oh, okay. Great. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Great, so moved. Next on the agenda, report of the superintendent. And Peter, I think many of the comments that were made during the public comment section, you will have additional information on, and then as well as in our report of the board committees. So I think it's very timely. I will turn it over to you.
And I'll try to cover all those things. So if I don't cover them, please prod me and let me know if there are other questions you have. I'll talk about that in the COVID-19 response planning. I have a lot of the questions that I had and bring everyone up to speed on where we are. Before we do that, I wanted to introduce Campbell, our new MUHS principal, to the board. We are incredibly excited to have him here. He has already brought incredible energy, enthusiasm, knowledge, humor. Justin, what else?
You're too kind.
I know. I'm serious though. We are really excited to have Justin here. I wanted him to both say hello to the board and talk a little bit about what he's doing right now. It's as you can imagine, a strange time to be transitioning to a new position like this and such an important position. Justin, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about with MUHS? What do you want to share?
So I know you have a lot to do tonight, so I'll keep my remarks brief. But number one, I just wanted to say hi. It's great to be here with you all. It was I think it was the same week I accepted the job. COVID shutdown happened, so it was a little bit of a wild move. But my family and I are really excited to be here. You know, in my time, brief though it's been, I've been really impressed with the dedication that the MUHS staff is putting forward. I've been connecting with them a little bit in person, obviously observing all protocols, mostly via Zoom and poll and correspondence. And I think it's just so heartening to see how much they want to, again, following all safety protocols, they really want to be with the students. They're concerned about the students. They're so focused on the kids in front of them. I think more than anything, what I see is a remarkably dedicated staff who, like all of us, are just kind of maxed out. You know, they've been doing a lot of work with IB, and they were really diving into that. And then kind of right at this critical moment, COVID has happened and really complicated things. So, you know, I'm very heartened by what I see. You have a lot of remarkable people here who care deeply about all of the students in this community. So it feels good to be part of that team. I'm happy to answer any questions that are out there and provide more feedback as the year chugs along. But it's really great to be here with Dr. Burrows and the central office team and everyone at the high school.
Well, Justin, thank you very much and welcome. We're really sorry about COVID and it's what it has done to your onboarding. That has got to be the worst time to take on a new high school position and move a family. So you have demonstrated great resiliency already as a competency, and we are incredibly fortunate for that. The communication that we've seen has been just remarkable and outstanding, and we appreciate the tone and tenor that you're bringing to your work. You know, our community right now is rich for communication. It's rich for transparency. It's looking for, you know, that type of environment to operate within, and your contributions to demonstrating that we greatly appreciate.
Yeah, thank you. It's been amazing how, you know, I've just communicated a couple of times, but it's been amazing the correspondence and the back and forth that has happened as a result of that. It's really helped me to dive in and get to know the place a bit.
Good. I also wanted to say something also in that there's not a time ever where Middlebury College was closed, the schools closed, COVID was on our minds all over, and our town has now got this giant tunnel going in the middle of it. I think there's no other time ever in the history of Middlebury where any of these things have happened, let alone happening all at once. So moving to this town and having to adapt to us will hopefully all get to know each other in a way that is not through this, which I find unbelievably awkward, even with my grandchildren. But I find it also that we have something to look forward to as we proceed. And I really would welcome you, and I look forward to time of actually, if not bumping elbows, shaking your hand. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Peter, C.
Yeah, Justin, could you just very quickly tell us what a typical day is for you right now?
Sure. You know, I've been, like many of our staff, I have 2 young children who will be at school in Cornwall to start this year. And so I've been working a fair amount from the office. So on a typical day, I've been going into the office to, you know, organize the space, get to know the place a bit. Typically, there's a fair amount of Zooming and electronic correspondence. I think that's probably true in every industry right now. So that's, as many of you have said, that's a bit challenging. You know, so much is lost in this method of communication, but it's the best we've got for now. So a typical day is a lot of reading of documents, typically a fair amount of serving on one committee or another around COVID planning, which Dr. Burrows is going to get to shortly, and a lot of Zooming and phone calls with staff members and parents and some students who are reaching out.
Thanks, and it's great to hear that you've moved to one of the best communities in the district. Not the best, but potentially the best.
My kids and my wife and I are having a blast exploring the area. I mean, it is a crazy time to have moved, but in a weird way, we're really settling in, and it feels nice to be here, and everyone's been so welcoming. I Zoomed the other day with I forgot the number, but maybe 15 or 20 students who were interested in talking about the topic that was just mentioned, racial equity, injustice, etc. So a bunch of current students and recent graduates Zoomed with me, and we covered those topics. They also, mentioned places I should take my kids. So it's really been a nice way to dive into the community a little bit.
That's awesome. That's great. Any other questions or comments for Justin? Well, Justin, as Peter said, welcome, and we are thrilled to have you here and look forward to the imprint that you are definitely going to make. So thank you very much.
It's great to be here. I'm going to excuse myself because I'm going to go take care of the kids while my wife goes to one of her Zoom meetings. So,
have fun.
Have a good evening.
So I'll continue. Justin mentioned recovery planning team. Justin is serving on our recovery planning team. So kind of a broad update on where we are this week with our planning. So last Wednesday was kind of the big reveal in terms of the work that we did both locally and over the course of about a month from when those initial guidelines for school reopening came out from the agency, and when we had kind of pushed and prodded and gotten enough information from the state and health officials to determine what that really meant for schools. I think I shared this before, but I do want to reiterate that this process has not been one which lays out really clear direction and allows us to just kind of plug in resources and move forward. We've had to do a lot of interpretation along the way. It's what, as I mentioned previously and mentioned to the community, it's what I think drew the CVSA group, the Chittenden, Franklin, Addison, Grand Isle group closer together in determining how do we move forward based on the current guidelines. So after that information went out last week, articulating that we would be starting in a hybrid model and giving some information about what that would look like, not to a really high specificity yet. We have, in the last week been working on our action teams to continue to build out what that looks like. And you can imagine, and Lorraine mentioned the letter from a superintendent that went out over the weekend. I think that articulated some of the challenges and frustrations of the process. We're trying to figure out a lot of moving pieces, and when you look at the 4 different action teams that we have in place, it's requiring all 4 of our teams to be very closely aligned in figuring out how do we make sure that we have enough staffing to start the year, that we've problem solved the issues that our families and employees have in terms of childcare in a hybrid model, which is a big challenge. We're looking at the healthcare guidelines, students that need to be in every day, students that will be in twice a week. We're also collecting information. A survey went out last week at the same time we published that information. We are gathering all of that survey data to determine how many families are comfortable with the remote only option as opposed to being part of the hybrid model. Can people hear my dog barking? Okay. I have a small band coming to play outside here today. My son has asked his friends over, so I'm hoping that there's not too much bleed in. If there is, I'll have to move. Sorry about that. So there are a lot of details that we're still figuring out. I think we know that whatever we design, we have to be really pragmatic about it and be sure that everybody's taken care of in whatever plan that we're moving forward. You know, I would say we are concerned just looking at staffing and Steve mentioned earlier about substitutes. We're looking at actually hiring some substitutes to be full-time this coming year so that we have resources when folks are not able to come in. There are a lot of challenges in not just when staff are sick, but thinking about all of the things that staff are juggling, which were in the initial guidance or the initial mandate from the governor at the beginning of this extended school closure, when we had exemptions for employees who had prevailing conditions, who were over a certain age. Those exemptions have now gone away. And so we do have the FFCRA, which is, what does that acronym stand for? Coronavirus?
Family First Coronavirus Relief Act.
Yeah. So we do have that. We have FMLA and ADA, but we know that we have a lot of work to do with our employees to make sure that we have a really clear and accurate picture of what the fall will look like, and make sure that we can staff every classroom and be ready to go. So we're still in the middle of determining that. We are working on a survey right now to go out this week to our educators to ask them about what their needs are going into the coming year, and to better kind of design also for them as well. We have a pretty good sense of how Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday will work. We do have to split the cohort and determine, you know, it's not as simple as just putting a line down the alphabet, but we have to look at the number of families that are going to do remote only. Those students won't be in, and a number of other factors. So that's information that we know the public wants to know now. We have been getting communication from families asking, can we attend this here or there, or for a number of extenuating circumstances. So we realize that we want to kind of get that determined and figured out within the next couple weeks, so that folks know kind of we can start planning for the fall. I think one of the things as we move forward and start to make some of these decisions, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that the guidance that we're receiving from the state has continued to change almost weekly. And I don't think it's wise for us to think that now that we've made a decision to move forward in the fall in this certain way, that all of a sudden that guidance is just going to stop. So I would expect in the weeks to come more guidance coming that we're going to need to respond to. And I think the more that we can be planning for the different phases of learning that we're going to confront and remain as elastic as we can and not get too stuck in one way of thinking, I think we're going to have a lot less anxiety and a lot less, we're just going to be able to move more fluidly between phases. And I would expect, and it hasn't been kind of well documented yet, that, you know, if, for example, we start the year and we have a student who tests positive, right now we've been told that we contact the agency, or we contact the Department of Health, and they provide guidance. I imagine that if that happens, we're going to have to move pretty quickly, whether it's a school or whether it's the entire district, depending on how far reaching the contact tracing is, et cetera. So I think we've been living in suspension for 5 months now, as we're kind of waiting for this to go away. And I think as a district, as a community, I think we're going to have to continue to lean on each other. And I think we're all going to be experiencing stress and anxiety in the months to come. But the more that we can be thoughtful around our planning and work together to solve this, the better. So that's the information, or that's the message and the vision that I think our recovery planning team is working from. I feel that we're in the right place right now in terms of the work. I know, as I mentioned earlier, people want kind of all the answers now, and we realize that we can't give all the answers now, but we are endeavoring to both find them and create them and co-create them with others. So that's kind of a rough outline of kind of where we are today. What's coming in terms of the next few weeks is we have a administrator retreat coming in a week. After that, I'm working on the public-facing document for all 4 phases of learning, which I'm hoping to have completed by the end of next week to share with the community. That will be a high-level kind of executive summary of how we're going to be moving through the year, depending on what the guidance is from the state.
So Peter, is there a way that, or is there a place right now that folks can go online that shows, you know, here's the document that you sent out to everyone, they can access it there, here's the admin retreat date, here's the plan for when we hope the public facing phases of learning will look like it, where can folks get that type of update?
Erica has been working on a new web page for all of this information. In the meantime, she's been uploading things to the website individually, not in one place. So
okay.
she shared with me a couple days ago the model for a new place to hold all of this information.
I think probably getting some type of, you know, COVID slot would be great, that folks can then just go and click under that as a header.
Yeah, we have that in a couple places on the homepage under news and announcements, and then there's another one. They're in a couple different places right now. They need to be consolidated into one.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Erica's working on that?
Yep.
Great. Chip.
Peter, how unified will be the solutions in all the, well, you mentioned 4 counties, but I mean, I honestly, you're sort of trying to find some way that you can not reinvent the wheel each school if someone has, but I mean, how do you envision that to happening? I already hear, you know, I have a daughter who teaches at CVU, and the model is quite different than what you're talking about. So.
Yeah, we've talked about aligning at the highest level, but with local variation, and a lot of that has to do with scale. So what CVU can do with, you know, 4,100 students, with 1,700 students, we have fewer resources sometimes to be able to do some of the things that they're doing. So we are aligning kind of where it makes sense. I think there's a lot of work that we're aligning across our county. We're tied together in our county in a lot of different ways. So we are working along the 3 Addison County school districts on a number of things. I think one of the places where we're going to see that really take hold will be childcare. So we're looking at that in terms of a regional response.
Can I just follow up with one other question?
Yeah.
You know, we've talked forever about small schools. Some of our schools have 50 students or 60 students and have quite a bit of what we would call excess social space, if that would be what you would want to say. Can you just talk about how it impacts Mary Hogan versus Weybridge versus Ripton or whatever? having two extremes in our school systems.
So I think if you're looking at the current guidance of 6 feet of separation, you know, we have some in our small schools, we have some classes that are small, that are, you know, maybe 10 students. But we have many, since we've started blending, we have many classes that are much higher than that, that are 18, 20, etc. So it isn't that there's a lot of, in terms of the classroom space, I mean, in a few of our schools, we have an additional classroom. So we could move into, you know, like move a whole class, for example, from Mary Hogan into other schools. We did talk about that and talk about what would the lift be for that, and then how could we transition if we do that, and we think about the transportation hurdles of that, which are fairly significant. Can we then also transition between different phases of learning to go from hybrid to fully in person to fully remote throughout the year? And as we looked at our current numbers and maintaining the 6 foot spacing and figuring out the puzzle for transportation to move students, you know, basically across the entire district, we felt like that solution in terms of spreading out all of our elementary kids wouldn't necessarily get us to the 6 foot separation in every classroom throughout ACSD. We could probably do it in some schools, but not all schools. And for that reason, we didn't feel like that was the best direction to go, especially as the guidance, as I mentioned earlier, keeps changing, and I expect it to keep changing.
And Peter, is it safe to say that we're not to a point yet where we have a good understanding even of what those populations are going to look like, because so much of that will depend upon parents' willingness or comfort level in sending their kids to school, regardless of the town?
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments for Peter on this topic? Mary?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about families adjusting to this very fluid schedule of where their kids are going to be and who's doing what. I mean, what I'm hearing from families is they were hoping this extended summer vacation would provide some relief from remote learning, and that they would be able to get back to work, and that their children would be in a safe place. And now it's just everything's still sort of up in the air. So you mentioned that there's a rapid response for the county regarding childcare. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm not sure rapid response.
Regional response.
Regional, yeah.
Okay.
A rapid regional response. Yeah, so I'm working with Sheila and Patrick. We began looking at this in earnest at the beginning of last week, as we started to realize that while childcare hasn't been one of the things that schools carry, we don't think we can start school without figuring out a way, at least for our employees, to have coverage so that they can teach. So that is I think an initial gateway that is absolutely essential, that we figure out how to have teachers be able to be in the classroom, at least for those 4 days a week. So it started kind of at a high, kind of like building bright futures conversation with some folks up in Chittenden, and Sheila's taking the lead in Addison County and reaching out to local partners to see what's possible. One of the challenges is that most of our local partners have reduced the number of students they're accepting. The demand, as we all know, is really high anyway, even outside of COVID-19. So space is a consideration in terms of being able to do that. So we're in the process of trying to think outside of the box to create a plan that works and of course, a lot of our employees, even if we take care of our employee students who are our own students, we still have lots of employees who live outside of the district, but work in the district. So that's another challenge to figure out. Is there some way that districts could be working together to support each other in that way?
So that takes that sort of focuses on employees' children, but the
Right.
children from other families,
Exactly.
the need is also great.
It is.
And
I think that's got to be I think the state has to really step forward to support this, because I mean,
right.
to think about, like, schools don't have the capacity or the staffing to be able to create we ran into this in the spring, right, where we were trying to get childcare started for essential workers, and we looked across our whole current staffing, and we weren't able to create a program here. We were able to partner with Mount Abe and provide some support for some folks in ACSD, but yeah, I feel like there's a little bit too much left to us to figure out.
Yeah, I'd like to see
And
the state,
that's one of them.
somebody else take on this particular side of the problem. Because
I totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. Thank you.
Peter, see?
I have just a few questions. I'll just tell them, I'll ask them, and then you can answer them. If you can't remember, I'll come back to me. First of all, do you have a sense of how many families might completely unenroll to do full homeschooling? On the topic of the state sort of coordinating or helping out in areas, is the state playing a role in helping school districts get all the PPE and thermometers and all that sort of stuff that it needs? And then 3, there's a lot of talk about delaying till after Labor Day, and just wanted your thoughts on that.
Okay. So we've got about 1,000 responses thus far from our survey that we sent out last Wednesday. Caitlin, do you know what the percentage is thus far?
I do. I looked at the data right before this meeting. Let me pull up the document. So at 6:02 p.m. this evening, we had 619 responses. I haven't looked closely to see how many of those are duplicates across the same family. So just straight dirty math, it represents 1,023 students. That's about 2/3 of our kids, 60% to 2/3 of our students represented in that. Looks like so far 5% have said that they want to do fully remote, 2% are looking at homeschooling. About 80% say that they are prepared to enroll their students in a hybrid model, and that leaves 13% with various answers that generally say as of yet undecided. But this is a moment for me to put a plug. 60 to 67% is not enough data for us to really work with concrete numbers. So if you want to help us spread the word, we'll close the survey on Wednesday so we can work with the numbers we've got. But
and Caitlin, what are you looking for from a response rate perspective?
Well, ideally 100% response.
Well, for you to be able to act, for you to be able to have confidence in making a plan around those numbers, what do you believe needs to be there?
So
85.
If we got 85, that would be phenomenal. On Wednesday, I need to shut it down so I can start disaggregating the data and getting that out to principals to start looking at real numbers and spaces, and regrouping as necessary. Yeah.
Do you want me to keep going on?
Yeah.
Jen has a question.
Are those follow-up questions to what we're talking about that we want to get now, or?
I was just going to suggest to Caitlin, as a parent who is trying to follow all this stuff myself, it might be helpful to ask building principals to send a reminder with that deadline, so that, you know, people kind of starting their week, you know, Monday might have, you know, kind of missed it, but tomorrow folks might see it and do it tomorrow for the deadline on Wednesday.
We sent that message to principals this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, we're on the same page. I think that will be great.
Any other comments for what Caitlin was chatting about?
Amy?
It wasn't about the survey per se, but it was just a question about the discussion in terms of, and it is a question for Caitlin probably. Do we have a sense of how the teachers, I know you said you're going to survey them about their needs, but do we have a sense of how they're feeling about the plan and from their perspective, or is there an option for teachers if they're not feeling safe? You know, like what's the picture around the teachers?
The only part I can answer is that we haven't surveyed the teachers. We're currently working on a survey for them, which I think will go out this week. We've gotten a lot of sort of individual communication from them, and I'll let Peter take the rest of that question.
Yeah, and they've been a part of not all of them obviously, but the 40-person COL team has a number of teachers on it. So we've gotten teacher perspective. I think, you know, a lot of teachers are balancing, as we all are, balancing personal and professional and trying to figure out how it all fits. So I think people are still processing right now and figuring out, okay, so how am I going to make this work for me, for my family, and balancing what my needs are. In terms of options, you know, we don't right now have an option, like a remote option where someone's just fully remote, because we need folks for the hybrid model to be in, you know, 4 days a week. So right now that's not an option as it was in the spring, right, when everybody was remote. So again, we're going to continue to kind of work with everybody and problem solve and figure out how to do our best with a pretty challenging situation. In terms of state PPE help, we did sign up to get a bunch of PPE from the state. I believe did we go up and pick it up yet, Brittany?
We signed someone to pick it up, but I can't remember what the date is. It's this week though. There were like 5 days and we were assigned one, which I think maybe was today. So it was primarily geared toward N95 masks.
So we're getting some support from the state. I think we're also going to need to be buying things as well. So we're not being, you know, provided everything we need from the state. But they did have a sign up a couple weeks ago for us to say how many masks we needed. I believe we have to buy a bunch of thermometers to have enough for all the different testing we need to do. Our health and safety team is finishing up draft guidelines, which mirror the recommendations of the state and also personalized for ACSD, that will outline, you know, the processes that employees need to go through and families need to go through prior to coming into school. And we're working on all those logistics right now in terms of how it will work. So once we determine, you know, all the health and safety guidelines, there's a whole bunch of work that needs to go into shifting our systems and figuring out who's doing what and how. And so that's going to be a lot of, you know, I think the principals are really anxious to get started on that work. We've been telling principals, you know, let's wait till we know what our district direction is together, and then you're going to go for it. So after the retreat next week, I think principals will be in full gear working in their schools and communities to determine how all the pieces fit together to make sure all the systems are running correctly.
Peter, with regards to that bucket of issue, what is the process for who initiates the requirement of a COVID test? Does the school initiate that requirement if a child presents symptoms, or is it up to parent discretion? How does that work?
Yeah, the school will require it. If the test comes back, if they have a high fever or any of the other symptoms, then they're required to get the test prior to reentry.
And are we pointing them to a location to do that, or they go into their normal then healthcare provider environment to make that happen?
I think they're either going to their provider, or we would help those that need support and figuring out how to go about that.
And is there any opportunity, given the incredible network that the college is putting in place right now with regards to testing, for there to be some consideration there for the district?
I think there is. Mary might actually have some information on that too. Kelly, who is our lead nurse and who is leading this action team, has been meeting with a bunch of people from Porter and college, etc. So she's connected us really well to resources in Middlebury. So I from what I understand from her, she is making connections to make sure that we're both aligned with practice. And you know, I think we have a lot more resource than some places that don't have a hospital right in town, etc. We're definitely leveraging that.
Okay, thank you.
Mary, did you have anything? Do you have any insider knowledge?
I don't have any insider knowledge from that. I mean, I also think about not necessarily the children who are showing symptoms, but they're a family member who is showing symptoms, and then the children may be, you know, asymptomatic, but then carrying. Right. So yeah. That goes back to the contact tracing that the health department will do. So I think that's going to be your link to an incredible link to stay safe, is through that health department. And I think they've done a tremendous job in the state. So I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to contain this.
So Peter referenced the start date. So there has been conversation at the state level, and there was a survey that went out last week to a number of different stakeholder groups. Went out to superintendents. It went out to NEA leadership. I think it went out to the VPA as well, asking if we would support a start date of September 8th, pushing the school year ahead from our current start of the 26th. And I think it was at least a 75% yes from superintendents, and I think that was matched by other groups as well. Given the complexities of school start, a little bit of extra time would really, really help us to figure out how all the pieces fit together. I would expect that if that's going to happen, we're going to hear about that this week. I would expect by the end of this week, we would be hearing whether the state is going to move forward with that or not. One of the big questions we had was, if that does happen, would that change the 175-day student day requirement in statute? If it didn't change that, if the start date was the 8th, but we still had 175 days, we would have to move the teacher start date to later, so that we would not go over the 187 teacher contracted days that we have. So we don't have answers to that yet, but we expect to hear them soon. I'm also in conversations with the other two Addison County superintendents who, by statute, were required to collaborate on our calendar. And that's related to Hannaford, so that we're all aligned together on the same days that we're in session. And we're talking about, if the state doesn't change the start date, that we look at moving a few of our in-service days from the year to the beginning of this year to push out our start date. So we're feeling like, I mean, beyond Addison County, I think in the state, from what I'm hearing, people are feeling that this is more a probability than not that the state will move it. So we're waiting on that. If that doesn't transpire by Friday, I'm planning on moving forward with that plan and then letting the public know at that point.
Okay. Other questions for Peter on this? Betty?
I don't know if this is the right time to ask about this. So I just want to have an idea of what a typical day would look like in return to school for students, for teachers and staff.
So I think that's
like bus rides.
so I think it's going to depend on the grade level. So elementary versus middle versus high. You know, we're working to limit the amount of grouping and movement that students do through the day. So part of what our principals will be doing is, you know, instead of all the movement that currently happens, for example, at Mary Hogan, where students are going down to the art room and then coming back, and there's lots of mixing with other students, they'll be figuring out ways to bring some of those services and some of that learning to the classroom, while also trying to maximize outdoor learning. I know at a number of our schools, principals are working to find tents to put up outside to increase the outdoor space. I think they're realizing that, you know, students don't want to be in one room all day. That there has to be movement, especially at a young age. So they're going to be working to build that out. We expect, based on our survey previously, that buses will look pretty different. And we also expect, based on what people shared with us, that we'll have fewer bus riders this year than we normally do. Brittany, what was the data on that?
Sorry, can you say that again?
For the bus riders coming in from the survey, didn't a number of people?
Yeah, about 80% of respondents said that they believed that they could provide another means of transportation if bus transportation was limited.
So if they follow through on that would be a big change. So I think there would be a lot more space on buses for students that do take the bus. So, you know, I think what it looks like, we're kind of building right now, but I think we are building it with the belief that it needs to feel as kind of quote unquote normal as possible. We have the mask mandate, and that's something that I think a lot of parents are concerned about and thinking about, like, how is my student going to do wearing a mask all day? I know for adults that's challenging. So I think that it is going to be, there is going to be a period of just getting used to this kind of like new normal in terms of what the classroom looks like. But I think we're also guided by the desire to maximize whatever we can, and during the pandemic, continuing to inspire, continuing to have fun, continuing to do all the things that we do in the classroom. Caitlin, Vicki, anything to add from the COL work in terms of painting a picture of the classroom?
I don't think so. I think we'll have more of it this week. We have another meeting with our 40-person advisory committee, and then we're meeting again with our individual teams on Friday, when we're really just trying to focus on how do we staff to the best of our ability while kids are in person on site, and how do we provide them the support that they need, and then think about how then do we serve students who are also remote. So we got it. I think those are, and we have lots of questions about students who may need additional time on site, and looking at how to prioritize that, and what that's going to look like for students.
Yeah, we're currently looking at instructional time, thinking about the minimum required instructional time that from the state, and how much of that we can take care of in person, because there's so much value added to having students in person. And then what does that leave for time that needs to be done at home? And then really thinking about which are the activities that in terms of pedagogy and learning are the most valuable to do in person, and which ones can function remotely. And then we're also thinking about, so when the students are remote, what are the parameters for making contact, and who's taking on that responsibility? We're trying to be really careful to design a system that's sustainable for teachers who are teaching students on site and remotely at once. And it will look very different at the elementary versus secondary level. And frankly, that middle level will be different still, right? So we have a lot of very drafty documents. Each meeting that we have, and Vicki and I have a lot of different teams that we meet with to cycle through these decision points, moves the thinking further along. So I think we'll have more ability to paint a picture by the end of this year.
Great. Other questions for Peter? Jory.
I'm thrilled that we're thinking outside the box in terms of outdoor learning spaces. I think it's an untapped resource that we have. I'm wondering if there's any work underway or any plan for work to happen this summer around air quality, air circulation for the times that we are limited to the indoor spaces.
So there is work that's happening as we speak, and there is there's support for that at the state level too. I'll let Brittany share a little bit of that. She's been leading that with Bruce.
Yeah, I can't give you as many specifics as I would like, but Bruce has been working on some updates to HVAC systems, as well as heat pumps and ventilation, including like air purifiers in places where we can't get in to do an entire, HVA system overhaul. So it's a little unclear to us still which of this might be covered with CRF funds versus there's a separate grant pot. So we're working out the funding for it, but we're definitely prioritizing that. They're right now working in Shoreham, and work has taken place in some other schools as well. So we'll have to continue to work on that throughout the year, but there has been a significant amount of work done this summer so far.
Victoria?
Yeah, Peter, I'm wondering if you can speak at all. I know I've gotten lots of questions about sports at the middle and high school levels, and I'm wondering if you have a timeline for when any sort of announcement's going to be made, or if you have any insight as to what the season might look like.
So some of you know that information has been trickling out probably for maybe a month or so related to sports. And it's gone through a lot of different groups at the state level. So I think it started with the VPA, and then it became a larger statewide conversation with other agencies. I expect, from what I understand, that information is coming out within the next week in terms of what the guidelines are for fall sports. And that will be within this, the step 2 guidance that we're starting the year in. And what I would guess, and I haven't seen this document, I've just heard about the work, is that the document will provide what happens in step 1, step 2, step 3, and pick a sport. In step 2, in soccer, you can do this. In step 3, you can do that. I think it's going to have that kind of detail, which I think is really important.
Yeah. Great. And do you know?
I believe our athletic trainer has been a part of that team, and she's exceptional. So I expect it to be good.
Great. And do you know, will they also be addressing theater and some of the after-school arts programs, or is that a different group working on that?
That's going to be a different group. That really falls more under our health and safety guidelines that Kelly is leading. Kelly Landwehr, our lead nurse. And that will provide guidance in terms of, can you do woodwinds at all? Do you have to be outside? How far apart? Choral is a big challenge. Choral music is a big challenge, unfortunately. So that guidance will articulate just how all of that happens. And those music teachers and others will be planning around that to figure out other ways to engage students this year if they're not able to do what they normally do.
Other questions for Peter on this? Betty?
So there are a lot of families that have been benefiting from meals, and your team, the team did a great job during the remote learning to deliver meals to homes. How's that going to look like with the new arrangement, especially given that during the regular school year, students would be paying for lunches or breakfast. So if we have students going to school and some at home, how do you plan to address that?
So I know Brittany and her team are working on this, and we have the benefit now of Laura, who is our new food service director, providing massive experience and support. Not that Brittany didn't have it all under control before. Brittany, do you want to provide an update?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay? I have a fan in the background, so.
Yeah, no, you're great.
All right. So when we operated our meal program from March to June, normally we operate under National School Lunch Program, which has a certain style of serving and certain ways that meals have to be served. We were able to operate under what's called the Summer Food Service Program, which has a higher reimbursement rate. And it also enabled us to serve students in our community that didn't attend one of our schools. So the USDA granted a statewide waiver for what they call area eligibility. And this meant that any child 18 and under that wanted to access food from ACSD was able to do so for free. And we were able to get reimbursed for that under the federal guidelines. That waiver has expired. And so we'll be operating again under the National School Lunch Program when we start back up in August or September, whenever we do that. So we won't be able to serve, we'll only be able to serve those that attend a school in ACSD, and we won't be able to serve students for free unless they are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And we are doing some work on that to try and encourage people to fill out applications again, even if they've been denied in the past, if they've had a change in circumstance. We also get information from the state under what's called the direct certification list, which lists students that are eligible for SNAP benefits. And if they're eligible for SNAP benefits, they're automatically eligible for free and reduced lunch. So that has been expanding some, and we have seen some uptick in that. One of the things that we wanted to make super clear from the get-go is that every student that attends ACSD will have access to school meals daily, whether they're in school or at home learning. This could look a little bit different. It could mean that we would provide multiple days worth of meals. Monday we might provide meals for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Wednesday we'll provide for Thursday, Friday. We're still working that out a little bit. Our current thinking is that we'll utilize the bus routes again to provide meals to students who are not in the building for learning. It's a little, there's some complicating factors, which I won't get into because we're gonna figure it out for sure because kids need food. But kids will be able to access meals at school. They'll eat in their classrooms. They won't be able to eat in the cafeteria. And it'll be a bit of a reduced options, but we really want to make the food appealing so that students are drawn to it and make it more like catering. This is in-school catering, this is at-home catering. And, we'll find a way to get meals closer to students. We won't be able to walk them to their doorstep, but we do plan to send them to bus stops. So that should cover the majority of our students.
Thanks, Brittany. Jen.
Sorry, I had to find my mouse. I want to thank everybody, the board members for great questions and all of the administrators and teachers for working on this. I'm overwhelmed by it all as a parent too, and as a board member who's facing this responsibility and hearing that the first day of school might not be the first day of school. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to tell that to my kids? So there's just a lot that I'm trying to process and thinking about how the community might be processing it as well, or other parents. And I guess what it comes down to for me right now is it sounds like from what you were saying, Peter, there's, more information coming next week, probably, and probably the week after that. And with everything with this pandemic, it's like it changes day to day, minute to minute. And as a parent, trying to provide some sense of normalcy or calm, or that we've got this, is there a type of communication where you could sort of outline, timeline, when certain decisions are expected, like when you expect to know which days kids will be in school and how they might know if their friends are going to be in school with them, and when we might know the start of the school date, just things like that. And is there a possibility of being in school full time, come we reevaluate after Christmas or something like that? Is there some hope and planning that I might be able to express to my kids and that others might be able to express to their kids of what might be coming?
I think in terms of our own process over the next couple of weeks, I'm sending another communication out this week, and I'm waiting to see what we can complete before I send that out, in terms of sharing more information. So I can certainly share, our timeline right now in terms of information to the public is probably, but in 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be close to the start of school, and we'll have kind of everything completed at that point. So I could easily articulate that timeline. I think the looking at where we are in step 2 and the commitment we're making at this point right now, based on the guidelines and the 6-foot rule, to hybrid learning, and when we might change that, whether it's changing in whatever direction, is so hard to know. I think we can put our own review of it on. I think given the challenges of the transitions, I think if you look at the secondary level, we probably are looking at least at a semester. It would be hard to change mid-semester and make everything work. I think you could change mid-semester and bring everyone back. I think it would be harder to go fully remote and be moving around like that mid-semester. I just think given what's changing, and even what I'm seeing unfold this week at the state level, as people continue to talk about the focus on having elementary students come in full time, which which superintendents were fully supportive of, and we waited an entire month of asking questions around the 6-foot rule, and the guidelines never really changed. Just they created an FAQ which didn't really provide more clarity. There's incredible concern in the community around not following the guidance. And if you remember when that CDC guidance came out on schools like 6 weeks ago, maybe, I know that hit Facebook, and it was like, so there's real concern in terms of not fudging the guidelines, but following them. So I think it is pretty changeable, and I think the guidelines even are probably changeable. So if we get information that, okay, we've looked at more research, and now we believe something different, so step 2 guidelines look like this, we're going to have to be responding to that and moving pretty quickly. So I think for those kinds of things, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. I think you explained it perfectly, that we do really need to kind of, as humans right now, I was mentioning feeling suspended for 5 months. People are ready to get back to their friends. They're ready to get back to routine. They're ready to get back to those things that sustain and feed them. And we're definitely thinking about what we can share that will help people feel that way. That document that I mentioned, it's not really a kid-focused document. It's not something a student would probably want to read, but I think for parents, having parents see kind of how ACSD is going to be supporting students and families through the different phases of learning, I think will help. to know that there's a plan. Because I think one of the things that's challenging is in the absence of knowledge, people tend to start to fill in, and anxiety can increase significantly. So the communication piece is also critical.
Has the state or any of the districts provided any type of how to talk to your children about going back to school?
I feel like I've read things just on my own, but I haven't seen anything.
I think the National Association of School Psychologists probably has some information out.
Well, and I think even a little bit closer to home, like given our circumstances, how should our parents, how can our families have that conversation with their kids in a way that, you know, it's like the prisoner's dilemma. You don't want to provide them with an unrealistic expectation. You want to provide them with, how do you help them deal with what reality is going to look like rather than creating a reality that they can deal with? You know, how do you do that? So I don't know if that's something that, just something to consider, like how do we help our parents have that conversation?
Yeah, and all I know is I've heard my son tell people, oh yeah, school's starting August 26th, because he hasn't heard anything different. And so now I'm thinking, okay, I have to somehow break it to him if and when that's not happening. And we're all of us humans are under so much stress, and I've been with my children every day, all day since March, name it. I don't even know. Sounds like March 2000 at this point. And so, like, you know, all of our patients are just about like at the end of it. And so I'm afraid that one more thing that I can't sort of present in a calm, consistent way just might set them over the edge. So I think the more that we know earlier, we can set that expectation with like, this is what it's going to be. You're going to start this day on these, you'll go to school these days, X, Y, Z. Just might be helpful because they're hearing it from friends and they're hearing those rumors from other people. But if we can give them the facts, at least in my family, I know that that would really help.
Yeah, I was informed there was no buses happening, no transportation, nothing. Buses are gone. It's amazing what's going around.
So I have a question, and I don't know if you can answer it, but with the 2 days in, 3 days out, how does this affect the Career Center and those students that are in the upper level courses there, particularly the juniors and seniors, many of them that probably drive? How is this going to affect them?
I know that Dana is working with the 3 principals. I know they met last week, and I was not able to attend a meeting with Dana afterwards. He followed up with the other 2 as the superintendents, and I think we have another meeting coming up this week. So people are planning around that and figuring out how all the pieces fit together. You know, I think that's primarily happening at the principal level and not the superintendent level in terms of schedules and how students can continue at the Career Center, continue, you know, I think one of the challenges I believe is transportation, especially from the other 2 districts, not from us, obviously, since it's part of our building, but I think that is one of the challenges of the hybrid model.
Any other questions for Peter before we move on?
So I had one other thing related to this. I sent an email a minute ago. We got guidance on Thursday from the AOE. Generally, the guidance sometimes has a bunch of different things in it. This one does too. It's a 1-page document. It basically talks about board decision making during COVID. This came out on Thursday after we presented our plan. I was in a statewide meeting with Secretary French later on Thursday afternoon, and you know, most superintendents were really surprised to get that information because they had been working with their staff and with their boards and kind of moving along. He said in this statewide meeting that it was a recommendation, not a requirement, that this guidance. I understand that it's kind of continuing to be talked about, so I think I'll have more information on whether it's something that we need to do and need to look at or not in the next week. So when I get that information, I'll share it with everyone, and then I think we can act as we need to at that point.
Great. That sounds good.
We now have, oh, sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're now to the big topic of the night. Strategic plan. So this is a pretty significant end. And when I think about the 6 years that we've been working with this document, I mean, it might seem kind of like it doesn't fit with everything we're experiencing right now. But I think it's important to reflect on how many people have been a part of this work. You know, when I think back to the board initially creating the vision and mission for the plan, and all the action team work, and then all the work that's happened since then, it's been a Herculean lift. It's involved thousands of hours of volunteers. Think about how many committees Jen has been on. So, you know, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think we've achieved, talk a little bit about what I think is ahead, where we're still falling short and need to focus more attention, and then answer any questions. And I'm going to let Caitlin talk a little bit. She's been the brainchild of this document and has spent lots of hours working on charts and writing things up, and has done a superb job. So I want to give her a chance to talk a little bit about the document and the process too. So we began 6 years ago, kind of as a district, looking at who we were. We didn't really have a unified vision at all at that point. And we came together, and through a lot of community engagement and visioning, came up with 3 areas that we thought were really, really critical to ACSD kind of becoming itself. And those 3 things were the systems work that we did, the innovation around instruction, and the community work. And it was pretty easy. We went through lots and lots of survey data and conversations with people, and those three areas came out loud and clear as these are the things that we need to focus on as a district. Through the action team work, we articulated all of the different objectives and action steps, and have been working over the last 5 years to meet out those objectives, to shape them a bit. You know, when you create a plan and you think the work is going to go one way, oftentimes you gain a lot more knowledge about what you didn't know, as opposed to getting things done that you thought you needed to do. And I would say that was a big part of this process for us, was actually getting to know who we are better. The work out of the first year and a half led to our pursuit of International Baccalaureate, and the process that we've been going through. That's been really, I would say, a 5-year journey at this point. And we're now at the tail end of our authorization process, and are going to be hearing back soon on what we think will be our authorization of PYP and full Ivy World District. I think that's been the most present work that we've done and the most obvious, but there's been so much that's happened around that in some ways I think you could look at all the other things and they would they would almost speak louder than just talking about International Baccalaureate. I've seen over the last 5 years collaboration and connection between staff grow exponentially, especially over the last few years. We've really connected our schools together in a way that we hadn't before. It's been inspiring to walk into professional development, or even walk into classrooms and teachers connecting across schools to work together, to learn, to grow, to really kind of move instruction in a way that doesn't happen in isolation. The community partnership work has been really exciting. It's also really challenging work too. I think we, as a community, we have such great engagement and so much support for our schools. And I think, when we even looking across Vermont, most folks that move to Vermont from other places remark at community and community engagement. I think we're kind of off the charts in terms of how deeply people care about education and schools, and it's reflected in so many different ways. I think we still have, as we think about where we go in terms of community engagement and direction, I think we still have a lot of work to reach out to those that we've never reached, that aren't comfortable coming to a board meeting, that don't want to make a public comment. We talk a lot about reaching out to them. I don't think we've quite figured out exactly how to engage them, and I think in the years ahead, that's something that I think we need to do in earnest, especially as we think about equity and access. We, at the beginning of this strategic plan, we talked about the challenge of assessment and really kind of gauging, how do you know you're doing well when you have no systems in place to measure anything? And I think now, 5 years later, we're entering into a period where we have more systems in place, where I think we can start assessing, is what we're doing working or not? And I think we're poised well with the systems work that we've done to enter our strategic plan for equity, which is the next step, with more clarity around data, around assessment, and really kind of learning how to move from the information that we gather to make change. I think over the last 5 years, if you look back at all the strategic plan reports, we have gathered lots of data on lots of different data points, standardized testing, personalized learning, etc. I think it's been a struggle for us to determine, so now what does that mean in terms of how we move forward? And so I think that's a challenge for us in looking at a strategic plan for equity, to think about what actions will we take when we see the data, when we look at the achievement gap, when we look at the various metrics that we have, how are we going to turn that into action to create change? So that's something that I want to bring to the fore as we do the work of building the next plan. A lot of people talk about strategic plans as something that, kind of are passé, because to plan out for 5 years is pretty challenging when the world around you is changing so rapidly. And, if you look at the strategic plan and the things that we said we would do in year 4, year 5, we sometimes didn't follow the same timeline. But I think for us at that time, in terms of where we were as an organization and a community, the plan has really helped to provide coherence for us. It's helped us have a focus. It's a focus that we all believed in, and it certainly has borne fruit. you know, I mentioned some of the challenges that I think that we continue to face, and I think the achievement gaps that are persistent, that we haven't really made a dent in at all, are something that we need to be spending more time thinking about. How do we not just continue to talk about it and then keep doing what we normally do, but what do we actually change to start to move that? I know this is a conversation that every school district in the country has, because it's a persistent issue across our entire country. And, you know, it's not going to go away by admiring it, but it is going to be impacted by, I think, making change in terms of our action. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier regarding what do we do when we see the data? What things do we change, and what things do we potentially transform that are going to be uncomfortable to transform, that some people might not like, that might go against status quo, but that will have an impact in terms of supporting all students. So I think as I look ahead, I think it's going to take courage to do some of that, and real clarity. Caitlin, do you want to talk a little bit about the report as a whole, and any words of wisdom?
Not a lot. You might have noticed that the report is shorter than usual and was later than usual. The later was just about trying to accomplish so many things this summer. The shorter was by design, though, in that I think that our strategic plan reports are very important and less urgent. And so I think that, you know, the work that we're doing around COVID is important and urgent. So we shortened the strategic plan report a bit to, you know, let more of the focus work with the COVID work. I also think we used to, in the past, speak to each action step separately. And we had gotten to a point where we were starting to say, well, we did that 3 years ago and we've started redoing it now. And so maybe talking about each thing one by one was not the most productive use of time. And so you'll see that in the, you know, the structure is largely the same. It's got an introduction, and then it reports out in a narrative way about the progress that we've made. Rather than go at the grain size of each action step, we tried to summarize what's the status of this work based on the action steps that we had laid out for ourselves 5 years ago. And what do we see as coming next? It really does, we really do feel strongly that the next theme is equity. In terms of that learning gap that Peter referred to, the racial diversity and bias, that level of equity work is really critical. We need to dig into that work and make sure that the work that we're doing serves all of our students well. Interestingly, 2 of our key performance indicators, the SBAC data and the YRBS, we won't have that information next year. So the YRBS is offered every other year. So the most recent data is from 2019. It'll be run again in 2021. So that will sort of go quiet for a bit. And we didn't do the SBAC this year. So there will be no data on that either. It's interesting because those are big metrics for when we think about equity and how and the extent to which we're serving our students equitably, and we won't have that data. I think in this year where we're iterating our plans so rapidly, we're going to need to find lower hanging fruit closer to home in terms of the data that we use to assess how we're doing with students. So the continuity of learning team will work on that as well, and especially the student support team is looking at metrics to determine how do we determine who needs more support, and then distribute the resources equitably to meet those needs. We're going to be looking at data that mostly we collect in the very short term, our FAST data, and various other sources to be determined. I don't think there's anything more to say, except thank you to Jen, who caught an error in the kindergarten readiness data. So you'll see a little red note that I've corrected that table.
Great, thank you. Peter, I think this is great timing also as we roll into our retreat work, having this now as, you know, pre-reading as a foundation is great timing.
Totally agree.
Great. Any questions for Peter or his team on this? All right, well, thank you for a very rich section of report of the superintendent. Greatly appreciated. Now moving on to the report of the board. The first thing we have is an action. Brittany, I'm assuming this is your bailiwick.
Yes, so every year the board has to approve meal prices. It's part our choice and part prescripted by the USDA. So the adult breakfast and the adult lunch prices are just what the minimum that the USDA says that they have to be. The student lunch price is a mix of both. So each year they set a number that is based on what schools are reimbursed for free and reduced meals for students. And they say that you have to set your price at minimum at that amount or agree to subsidize the difference with general fund or other revenues. And this coming year, that price is $3.09. But the food service staff have expressed that it's pretty tricky to make change for that. They don't keep a lot of pennies kicking around at the school, especially the smaller schools. So they asked that we change it to $3.10. So that's the proposal there. And all schools, last year, I think we brought them all in line for student lunch price. And then for student breakfast prices, there's a lot more discretion there. We don't get a set number from the USDA on that. And I'm proposing that we leave that level. You know, the plan this year was to try to get the schools at parity and have everybody have the same price. But given the environment, you know, the stresses that are on everybody and the fact that we are raising our lunch prices a bit, I'd like to keep that level. And our food service director feels that we're still able to produce breakfasts at less, you know, at that cost and not be losing a lot of money. So that's the long and the short of that.
Great.
Questions?
Any questions? Chip?
He's just adjusting his camera, I think.
Just exact. Great. Any questions?
No question.
Okay. Any other hand waving things? Super. So could I get a motion then to approve the recommended meal prices as stated in the memo from Brittany Gilman dated July 22nd, 2020?
I so move.
Second.
Great. Suzanne, second, I think there.
Yeah.
Perfect. All those in favor?
Aye.
Super. Any nays? Meal prices are so moved. Thanks, Brittany. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up on the agenda, committee updates. So there's a lot, I'm assuming, in this bucket as well. So we will plow through. The first committee update, let's start with policy. Mary.
Okay, we've met twice in the last month, and we've looked at, let me pull up the policies, Anna, that we've looked at. We've looked at the personnel recruitment and hiring policy. We're a little hung up on that one because one of the conditions of the model policy that was submitted to us from the Vermont State School Board was that the school board had to approve all hires. And we felt that that would be somewhat of a delay in terms of hiring, particularly when we're, you know, the number of people that we're hiring is critical, and sometimes we don't have a lot of time to waste waiting for the board to approve that. So Vicki was going to be speaking with our ACSD lawyer to see if we can alter that at all and make it more compatible with a quicker hiring process. with a final board approval following that. So that's in place. She has not been able to contact them. The other two policies we've been looking at was the transportation policy, which is later on in our agenda. We have a draft for everybody to look at so we can have a discussion around it. And I'll talk about it now so we don't have to waste time when we get back to looking at it. But we adopted the model policy with some flexibility in there regarding emergency situations or current situations that make it more fluid, so the superintendent can determine the schedule. And I think that the COVID situation puts that out there, that we will not be providing transportation for everybody, and that hopefully parents can provide more of that transportation. The other policy is the electronic record policy that we looked at last week. This is another requirement that was sent to us 2 weeks ago from the Vermont School Board Association. It's electronic communication between students and staff. And we sort of decided to adopt it as it is, knowing that the technology group is going to be working on, technology literacy and citizenship. And we will, at some point, make sure that the policy aligns with the procedures that they come up with. So that's basically what we've done on policy. Okay, and the discussion about equity, we'll talk about further. We didn't feel like one of our policies is A1, which is board governance, which talks a lot about how we would govern as a board. But I think we all decided that if, given the current situation, we really needed to try to stay aligned with a long-term plan, but possibly having a statement. And I think that was talked about at our last board meeting, that as a board or as we would make some statement around racial and gender and whatever equity, economic equity for our students as the lens in which we will, continue to operate. So that's coming. We assume we'll do that at our board retreat.
Board retreat. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Any questions for Mary? Yes, Jen.
Not related to these policies, but whatever happened with the student on the board policy? Are we just on hold because of the current situation, or will students be joining the board at some point?
Thank you. That was a concern for us too. So I'm going to drop that to Peter.
So we were getting ready to train our student board members when the closure happened and everything kind of went quiet. So I think we can be prepared to have them get started in, after the retreat probably, or maybe even before if the board wants me to try to contact them.
Have we selected student board members yet?
Yeah, two students were selected, and but they, like I said, they haven't been trained yet.
Right.
Because we had stopped meeting. So.
Okay.
So that was one thing that we discussed, was because when we had brought it to the board, the policy to that the procedure in selecting students was going to be brought to the board before the students were selected, was what our thinking was. And so we were wondering where the procedure was and whatnot. And
my recollection was we talked about, I came back to the board and talked about a procedure and then talked with Bill Lawson, who, let the student body know and talked individually to folks. And my recollection of how we left it was that I can easily write up a written procedure if you'd like me to, but that's my recollection of how we left it.
Yeah, I think a procedure would be helpful. And one of our goals for our policy committee is to have not only the policy, but then a procedure that we can refer to for greater detail or how it's actually being implemented. So if you can, I know you're busy, so it's not like the most
Sure.
urgent thing on your plate, but eventually, I
Yep.
think it'll be.
Sure.
Kip?
I think that's really important because I've had mixed feelings about student on board, and I really think it's extremely important to have an adequate procedure that's there so that this doesn't become a popularity contest. It doesn't, whatever provides us as a board and the student body with voices on our board to get the best and informed people that can carry information both ways is, to me, the most important part of it. And I understand people would want to do that in the best way, but I think we also have to have it written down.
Yeah.
We have a new principal this year. Bill did it apparently already before he left, but I really find that to me is extremely important.
Right.
And that was the whole purpose behind having that procedure come to the board, so that we can make sure that that procedure followed the board's thinking and desire.
Right.
Right, so Peter, let's just connect and make sure that we get that solidified, and then we'll go from there, okay?
One of the things that there we go. I'd really like to have student participation in the development of policies around equality and that whole issue that we're going to be looking at, I believe. It strikes me that students have something to say. I'm mute. Something's wrong here.
Nope, we hear you, Peg.
No, we hear
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I nope, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
I've said it.
No, absolutely agree. And I think, at least based on some of the conversations that I've had with Peter, there's tremendous work going on there right now, or the plan was for there to be effort and work going on with regards to the student voice. Obviously, some of those plans have had to be altered given where we are, but even the principal's comment today, getting together with students and having that conversation remotely, I think it'll be good for us to get insight into all that good work that is happening.
Right.
Absolutely.
Next up, negotiations. Peter, C, do you have anything other than what we'll talk about in executive session? Did I lose Peter?
It says he's still there.
We'll come back to Peter.
I would say, I'm back now.
Yep, you're back.
Okay, yeah, I've got a unstable internet. So I just say that we've reached a tentative agreement with the support staff, and we'll get the full agreement to the board for ratification at our next meeting. And everything else I'll save for executive session.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. Chip, finance.
We have not met in a specific way, no.
Okay. All right, and Victoria, facilities.
All right. Our last facilities meeting was actually before our last full board meeting. So we haven't met since then. I'll speak a little bit about what's been going on, but I'll turn it over to Peter and Brittany because they're sort of in the midst of the bulk of the work. That will be reported out. We have a scheduled meeting at 12 o'clock on August 11th. Prior to that, Peter and Brittany are meeting with all the principals in the district, which will be an integral part of understanding the needs, requirements of the school buildings, and whether we can fit the envisioned program into 3 buildings, or feel that a 4th building would be necessary. As Peter and Brittany continue to build out the 3 versus 4 school models, we will also begin to look at the school catchment areas as well as the idea and sort of the how school choice would work, and that will be what, you know, another arm that we'll be looking at before making any final decisions, and will feed into the final plan. I don't know if Peter, at this point, if you or Brittany have anything to add to sort of the work that you've been doing to get us ready for the next committee meeting.
I can speak broadly to it. So we're working on determining with the 3-school model and the 4-school model what the staffing implications are. We're also meeting with elementary principals to have them be a part of designing the educational vision for the work that aligns with the system of services design team work we're doing, that aligns with International Baccalaureate, and takes into consideration the facilities and other pieces that we need to be looking at to adequately determine costs, determine educational experience, equity. As Victoria mentioned, there are a number of factors involved, such as the catchment area, and if you have a 3-school model, where do students go from different parts of towns. We're working on looking at some of that data. I think what we'll have for the next facilities committee meeting, and we're also going to be asking David Epstein to provide support, as he's done the lion's share of the analysis up to this point in terms of the buildings, and has lots of experience in designing educational space. One of the things that we want our leaders to be looking at in preparing to provide this information to the facilities committee is what is it going to look and feel like? How is it going to be experienced by a student? As you think about what the needs are of an elementary school, and you think about this space, is this adequate or not, and why? So we're going to be going through that process too. There's a lot of I think subjectivity involved in determining exactly what the staffing looks like. So I think we're going to have deep discussion around values and why one position should be a 1.0 and one position doesn't have to be, and what the rationale is for that. So we'll also be having that conversation with them so that we can provide that information to the board to discuss as well. Normally our staffing in most of our schools has been established a lot of times by what we can spend. And in building a 3-school or 4-school model, we're not looking at what we can spend. We're just kind of looking at what we think the model might look like ideally. So it's a slightly different practice than we normally do year to year, or used to do year to year in our single school budget processes. And we have invited David to the next meeting of the facilities committee so that he can help share a little bit more background. And I think some folks may forget, this was at our annual meeting, was the last time that we all saw him. And that's when he presented the 1 school, all those different models that he worked on. So I think it will be helpful also for folks to hear and ask questions as we've had time to think about after that presentation, to dig a little bit deeper too.
Okay. And on the finances side, Peter and Brittany, what type of communication, or are there new indicators that you're seeing or hearing, or is there a new expectation as to when that world is going to become more clearer for us?
Not thus far. There's certainly, it's not hard to find a doomsday kind of information from some people, but I think there's so many competing factors. I mean, I think Amy earlier kind of mentioned what's the impact of people moving here, and what's the impact, like we don't yet know what the impact will be. I think what's scaring legislators and folks at the state level is that most indicators, even with the hot real estate market, most indicators point to significant decline in state revenue as the COVID kind of closure of many of our services continues. So nobody really has a handle on what that number is yet. So I think, I'm hoping we know more as we near our next budget, so we can be planning accordingly. Brittany, anything you've heard recently?
No, except that, a little ray of hope, I guess, was at the VSBA webinar that we attended, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
The VSBA, VSA, Mark Pearl reported that the deficit wasn't looking like it was going to be quite as bad as they thought. It's still striking and it's changing every.
I can finish her thought probably.
Excellent.
I was there too. What she was going to say is the FY21 shortfall isn't as bad. We initially thought that was going to be 150, and that keeps dropping. I think it might be at 91 right now. 91 million. Our big concern, which we've been talking about, is FY22 and beyond, which could have, which we believe will have implications on
hello.
actual model.
I'm back.
Hi.
Okay, I guess Zoom did not like what I said because it kicked me out immediately. Anyway, so we don't know yet in Vermont. We're still waiting.
Good. I guess another aspect of what we've been talking about from a facility standpoint is communications, and Mary and Amy and I think Amy will speak to this later, have been talking about creating these porch conversations where we go out into the communities and invite community members to host outdoor socially distant event where we can just field questions and talk to whomever wants to attend about facilities master plan and board work. So I think Amy will talk a bit more about the logistics of that. And then I just wanted to ask you all, I think we need to update and add to our FAQs. And so if you all could forward me anything that you're hearing sort of from community members in terms of information that they're looking for, sort of what their frequently asked questions might be, forward them to me, and I will try to answer them and put them up on the FAQ section of the website. I think that's all for facilities.
So the next big date for folks then is August 11th.
August
That
11th.
will be the next facilities meeting.
Yep.
Okay, great.
It's scheduled noon to 2.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
And then Amy.
Okay, and apologies again for not being on video. Okay, let me pull up my notes. So the first thing is we've changed the name of the committee because it's really not about planning and engagement anymore. It's really about communications and engagement. So we've changed the name of our committee. And we've met twice, I think, since our last board meeting. And there are 3 things that we're focusing on primarily. And the first is, and it's all related to things we've already been discussing. And first is the website and the way the board information is presented and represented, and trying to make it both easier for people to find things in a way that makes sense, and maybe archive or at least move off a main page some of the documents that really aren't relevant right now, but that are historical, particularly in the facilities master planning process. You can easily get lost really quickly. And the idea is just like right now, there's the newsletter that is serving as sort of a landing page. And the idea is to try to create something like that where the most prominent information would be presented, and then it would be easily navigated to the other pieces. And I'm working, or I should say Peter and Will and Erica are working on that, and we may get some help from the developers of the software, or see what kind of help we can get with that, and what we would need to do on our own. I can say already, Erica has been working. Are people hearing me?
Yep.
Erica's already been working really hard to try to at least make things a little more readable and easy to find, and so she's going to continue to do that in the short term. So that's the website. And this
Amy,
is
can I
really,
ask one question on that one? And this is
Yeah,
probably
sure.
for Peter. Who is on the listserv of the board newsletter? How is that? Who does that go to?
So that goes to everybody who gets any kind of ACSD wide email. So it doesn't go to every single person in every single community member. It goes to people that are parents. I think there are former parents on there too that sometimes get our information, but it's basically all the folks that we have in our database.
So if someone wanted to sign up, or if a non-parent wanted to get that type of information, where do we tell them to go to do that?
They can contact the central office, and we can add them.
All right, so they should email the central office and request to sign up?
Yeah, but what I would like to do is have it be something automatic where we can maybe take it out of where it is now and do something like MailChimp, where you can just automatically subscribe, as opposed to having to go. Right now we use School Messenger. School Messenger draws off of PowerSchool. So we have to input someone's name into PowerSchool. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. Will, do you have any feedback on that, or?
What's your question again, Peter? I'm following you, but I didn't quite understand what the question was.
So in terms of folks signing up for the newsletter or with School Messenger, is there a way, like an automatic subscribe in School Messenger?
I've been letting Jasmine handle it since we began using the service. I think it does a lot of things that we have not tapped into. And I know there's been some discussion lately with the communication committee about utilizing some of those, but I'm not sure about that. There also may be some plug-in features that we, could add on to. But I don't know about the subscribe piece.
Yeah, I
if
think
we could just get clarity around that would be great.
Yeah. No, I've noticed the need myself.
Great.
Yep.
Great. That would be hugely helpful. So that's one area. And then two are creating little vignettes, if you will, on video chats that really kind of try to capture some of the salient issues, and that really, in another format, address some of the frequently asked questions, and do it in a both conversational and informational way, so that it's a conversation, so that one question follows another, and I try to make sense. And the first four we're going to focus on, I want to pull up my notes, are, and actually the people I'm going to name, we would like to schedule these, ideally this week, so that if we were going to get a newsletter out by the end of the week, that we would have a link to at least at least one or two of them. That's ambitious, I know, but we can see. And I don't know if, depending on how late we finish up tonight, whether or not, you know, we can hang on, those people who I'm going to name in a minute, we can hang on and try to schedule it, or we just do something online afterwards. But Mary's the interviewer for all of these, and we're drafting questions right now. And the four, and these are not necessarily in order because I'm reading my notes. The four that we're talking about, one is in terms of the ACSD, how did we get here? So that would be involve Peter Burrows and Peter Conlin, and talking about, that's just the historical, how did we get here? And that would include the petitions that were discussed that were brought forward this year, and that whole dynamic around unification and representation and such. Another one around the facilities master plan, where are we and where are we going? And that would be Peter Burrows and Victoria, discussing the work to date and the move towards consolidation, and discussing some of the issues that we're looking at right now. A third would be around communications and engagement. We know there are questions around that. So what have we done to date in terms of community involvement and engagement in the facilities master plan process? And what can people look forward to moving forward? And then the fourth is really key, and it would involve Caitlin and Vicki, and it would be like the educational vision, like what are we hoping to accomplish through our facilities master planning process that's really about the kids ultimately, and that message doesn't always get out. So those are the four we want to produce really quickly, we'll come back to that. And then the Porch Conversations, that's the other piece that would be announced in the newsletter. That's why I want to get it out as soon as possible. And that's Mary and Victoria hosting, or being hosted, I should say, by community members who can invite their friends, but also a method for people to sign up to attend. And those could be anybody. They wouldn't have to be sponsored by a school or a parent group like the meetings were last year. They're really about talking to whoever in the community has the questions and wants to engage. We want to announce that process. There are a few details that still need to be worked out about the actual process, but the idea would be people would notify me with a few possible dates. We try to get it scheduled. We still have to figure out how people sign up. But those are the three ideas we're working on. I'll stop there and see what questions.
And Amy,
or community members, what did I miss? Yeah, go ahead. For
the community, for the e-chat around communication, that was with you and Jen, correct?
Correct. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Yep. Committee members, what did I miss? Anything?
Great. Any questions or comments for folks?
I just want to say that sounds very ambitious for that committee, and so don't be afraid to ask the rest of us for help.
Great, thank you. It is, and I am very grateful to Mary, who's agreed to like, you know, she's the video chats, and she's the one that's taken that lead, and she's the one that's drafted the Porch Conversation language, and so yeah, thank you. And actually, the whole committee is working because Betty and Jen have drafted the questions for the interviews that we would then advance to the participants so that you know what's coming, by the way. It is ambitious, but we have work to do.
Great. Any other comments for any of the committee questions? Super. Next on the agenda, we wanted to have a discussion with regards to board logistics moving forward and how we are conducting our meetings. You know, as Steve shared in the public comment, obviously there is, as we're getting closer to bringing our kids back into schools and as our own lives are starting to look a little bit different with opportunities to engage, how do we create an environment where the board can conduct its meetings in person and then afford appropriately distanced engagement from community members so that they also could attend those meetings in person. When Steve reached out with his question, my comment to him was, you know, Peter is getting additional guidance with regards to bringing in folks into our school buildings that are not kids or employees, and can we even do that? And so while it would probably be fairly easy from a logistical perspective to find a way to get us socially distanced, it's everything else that requires additional coordination. To kind of get a discussion and thoughts from you all as to where your comfort level is in coming back in person, thoughts on that from a timing perspective, and then figure out a way forward. So any thoughts on us coming to, yes, Victoria?
I think that it's hugely important that we come together in person before school reopens. And I had envisioned that, you know, it could be in the theater at the high school with everybody on the stage, and then spaces sort of taped off within the audience to ensure social distancing. It looks like, and Peter maybe can speak to this in a minute, but that we're not sure whether or not we can invite visitors into the schools, but I think we have enough community resources in town. We could do something at the town hall theater. We could do something at one of the churches. We could do something at the municipal gym, at the movie theater. So I think there are big enough spaces where we could safely gather. You know, obviously there's a question of how many people can gather in whatever space. So we'd have to make sure that we didn't go over our maximum. But I do think that it's important that we meet in person before we expect students to get back in the buildings.
Chip.
Yeah, I would agree with Victoria on that. I think for us meeting, I think we can overcome most of the questions relative to spacing, even if it's not in the school. It's just how do we incorporate the public and control that in some way without being exclusive. I mean, you know, you can say, well, only 10 of you can come. I think there's part of that that's difficult, but I truly think we need to, we're going to have kids in school. We need to be, as a group, meeting. It's not like there's hundreds of us. So I think we should work that out somehow.
Any other thought? Peter Conlon? Peter C? Maybe he's just giving you the high five.
I think he's frozen.
That's an off. Peter Conlon, are you there? All right, other comments while Peter's coming back. Lorraine?
Well, I don't think I'm the oldest member on the board, but I will say that I have not been venturing out very rarely, and I do not plan on attending any meetings in person. So just a heads up on that. I'm not comfortable doing it.
Other comments?
Peter Burrows, did you get any feedback from the AOE about how we could hold an in-person meeting as far as the public portion goes?
It's more working with our local team based on the guidance that the the Vermont Department of Health and AOE guidance. So, obviously we couldn't meet during the school day when students are there. We can meet, in the school building. There are concerns just, I think, in terms of keeping the, like not having large gatherings and keeping the public out generally, and also minimizing our student groups. As you know, we're basically changing classrooms from 20 students to 10 students. So, I think I think we can manage it. I think we legally can. I think the question is working with Brittany's team in terms of the cleaning and sanitization and all that, and then figuring out what the 4 different spaces, how many we can have in the school setting. I am concerned. I mean, I just have a natural concern that I think, as a few people have said, I don't like the idea of turning people away. And, I'm not sure if it would even be a problem or not. I mean, we don't generally have tons of attendees, so maybe that wouldn't be a problem at all. But, I just think thinking through how the community comes in, how it's comfortable for everyone, how it works would be important. But I think we can figure it out and manage it.
Jen?
Might be crazy. I've been called crazy several times before. I'm just thinking, as I'm standing here sweating in my house, in this shortened period where we have some outside capacity, could we, at least in an effort to meet in person but not put more burden on the school staff to clean after every surface that anybody might possibly touch, could we think about an outdoor space like the football stadium or someplace kind of like that, where there's some sound system that wouldn't make too much more work for folks, but that might be able to accommodate everybody that might want to come?
Other thoughts to consider?
I agree with Jen. I think the football stadium sounds like a great place, even into the colder weather, because we certainly hold lots of games. The other space is near the ball field, near Memorial Sports Stadium. They have some kind of a shelter but it's open on the sides near the tennis courts, and I think that could be another possibility.
No. All right. I mean, I think I agree with Chip that modeling from an in-person perspective is important, and how do we weigh that against the logistics of pulling it off, given what everybody else is spending their time trying to accomplish right now, and not putting an unnecessary burden. If this isn't something, it's important, but is it urgent? And so, we have on the agenda, which is also something that we have to talk about, the board retreat in August. And so do we shoot for trying to come up with a plan, again, in today's environment, that would allow us for a board meeting in person that right before the beginning of September, whatever that August board date is, the 3rd week or 4th week of August. Do we shoot for that and see if it's possible, just from a logistical standpoint, that's our intention? And if we can't pull it off, then we'll try to do it in September.
It's the 24th.
The 24th. So I don't know, Peter, from logistics perspective, given everything that you have on your plate, do you feel that we have the ability to even try to get a plan together to see if it's feasible?
Sure.
Okay. As Brittany smiled. So why don't we go down that path then, Peter, to try to find a feasible plan for in-person, and also find a way for board members to participate who are not comfortable participating in person, and making sure that we provide that type of access as well. I think hopefully also being able to say to the community, this is going to be live streamed, will mediate or lessen you know, the feeling that the community has to have to come out. So hopefully we won't have a untenable number of people that we're trying to support in person. All right, policy discussion B8. Mary. Mary, you're on mute. Still on mute? And you're not on mute. Perfect.
Okay.
You want to walk us through this?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that the B8, this is one for people just to start to look at and give some feedback on. We looked at it, and there's I had concerns why it was just students and employees, but this is the policy that's required right now, is between employees and students. And we, as I said, we were electing to just accept the draft policy from the Vermont State School Board Association, and then make sure that once the technology team has come up with their guidelines for digital citizens and how we communicate, that we would align the procedures to make sure that it met up with the policy. So that's basically for us to look at.
And then Mary, would it be your goal for both of these for us to come back at the next board meeting ready to, okay.
Yes, this is just for you to look at and then come back with any suggestions.
Perfect.
For us, okay?
Yep. And then the revised transportation policy as well.
Correct.
And those revisions were just called out in red?
Yes.
Okay, so they were fairly minor.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions before we get off of, yes, Jen?
I looked at them, and it makes sense, all of it for sure. The only thing that seemed like it might be a little bit hard maybe for students is the no communication between 11 and 6, and I can logically get why that might be in there. And maybe, you know, based on our work from the community partnership team, we might want to say you need to, you know, kind of be off electronics after 10, you know, for another kind of just mental health reason. But maybe just spelling out why, because some kids are just, you know, night owls and submitting their homework per se, you know, at 11 o'clock at night, rather than getting it in by 6 o'clock the next morning, kind of a thing. So that was the only thing that to me seemed like it could be a gray area, that, you know, is it a hard and fast rule? And when you mentioned, Mary, as far as communication between employees and students, it might also be helpful to think about student-to-student communication. I know that was a little bit confusing. Like, are the kids allowed to communicate with each other via that email? You know, their Gmail through school, or do they have to use outside communication?
Jen, we did talk a lot about that, because I had concerns of students and other devices that they were using, other formats that they were using, etc. But this model policy is specific between staff and students, and, you know, we just wanted everybody to take a look at it. And Vicki suggested that the technology team is coming up with some very clear guidelines, and they know more about this than we do at this point. So we're kind of waiting to see what they come up with as well. Okay.
Yeah, so they're moving forward with some work around digital citizenship.
And I believe the genesis of this was a 2018 act of the legislature requiring the VSBA to craft it. The statute didn't specifically say anything about 10 to 6, or that was, I imagine, some work group, some VSBA work group that worked with other statewide folks to come up with this list. So we're required to have a policy. I don't think we're required to keep all of the language exactly as it is in the policy.
I think we can change that.
Yeah. Not that people should be communicating at 1 in the morning, but.
And it may be that we're submitting, you can submit homework, but not asking for a teacher to respond to you at 11 o'clock at night, that kind of stuff.
Will some of these be covered in the procedure?
I missed that.
So, I mean, some of the things we're talking about, won't they be covered in the procedure and how to implement this policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the procedure probably wouldn't be directly just to this policy, but to digital citizenship as a whole. So it's a broader category, but it would speak to, I mean, part of it would speak to some of like how this actually works in practice.
Great. So Mary, we will all come well prepared at the next meeting.
Okay.
For any questions or comments on these. And then finally on this is the ACSD board retreat, which from an agenda perspective and a timing perspective, we just want to start to nail down I believe everybody's calendars should be blocked, correct, Peter? That went out through board pack, I think.
For the 10th?
For the 10th. So right now it's scheduled for the 10th. And I think it was initially discussed that this was going to be in person, recognizing that again, there are sensitivities to that. We want to honor that. So trying to figure out a way if having it in person, which would be the most efficient way, I think, to have some of these conversations, are there ways for folks who then would not be comfortable to have them participate as well? As far as a location, Peter, I don't know if you had some ideas on that. I know we've tossed some things around. I'm open to having people, I'd be, happy to have host people at my house. The house is in a way in which there's inside outside, so there would be some ability to appropriately distance there. There's also other locations that we could look at to make that happen. I don't know if folks have in general what you all are thinking with regards to an in-person retreat.
If we can pull it off, I'm all for it.
Okay.
Yeah, if we can figure out a way to do it. Especially, yeah, anyway.
I think it's much more effective if we can pull it off that way. I know there are reservations, and there's going to be that in any group, as I'm already finding in other groups that I'm involved with. But I think we have to sort of try to balance it as best we can. Not saying we exclude the people who don't wish to be personally there, but we need to find a way technically that they're equally involved if they want to be.
Absolutely.
So 2 things, Mary. On the board pack, I just looked it up. It is not listed on board pack at all. So nobody probably knew the dates. And the other piece, I think I can make the 10th. I have another meeting for PAHCC that might be that night. But the other thing that I want people to remember is that some people not wanting to come out isn't because they don't want to come out. It's because they may have an underlying medical condition that does not allow them to come out, and because it puts them in the higher risk category for it. So I really caution people when they say, well, they may not just want to come out. There may very well be a very good reason why they can't come out. So just thinking about that.
Absolutely.
Or they have family members who are at risk. So that we all understand that for sure.
I totally understand that. And some of us age is just totally in the risk category too. But I balance that off as best I can.
And we can always zoom in for those who are unable to participate, in person, but we want them participating.
So Peter, I'm mistaken then. I thought the 10th was discussed, but.
I think we talked about it previously at another meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was the chair's meeting.
Yeah. And we talked about doing it later on, like maybe at 5 to 9 or something like that.
I think it was at the chairs meeting because I have it penciled as the big question mark.
Okay. So how are folks, great. Is there anyone where the 10th is doable?
Doable?
I'll be out of town.
Jen's
I'll
out.
be out of town. I could Zoom in, or I could even just drive back for the day if necessary. I don't want to make it not work because of me, but it's not great.
Okay. Jen's out, and Betty, you can't make it on the 10th?
The 10th is our standard, sorry, the 10th is our standard second Monday too, just that's where we got to the 10th.
Gotcha.
I was just asking about the time. Like what time frame, from what time to what time on the 10th?
Well, I think we had discussed multiple possibilities. I think we thought perhaps the later afternoon one was better. And we were thinking that this would be a round of, a 4-hour type of engagement. Anyone else on the 10th is a no-go?
I just have to find out when my other board meeting is for PAHCC.
Okay.
But I mean, if we're gonna go for 4 hours, could we meet earlier rather than go 5 to 9? Could we meet like 4 to 8 or something?
Yeah. All right, so we'll put out kind of just a survey or Zoom thing to ask you all which times work best, and hopefully we'll be able to narrow that in. But if you could, it would be great if you could block kind of the afternoon of the 10th for right now as tentative, and then we'll figure out the logistics moving forward on that. And I do ask if any of you have any requests or concerns or hot points that you want to make sure are topics that get discussed during the retreat, to please email me as they pop into your heads as we start to put together the agenda. Anything else on board retreat? Victoria, did I miss anything on that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we can discuss once we once we agree on the time, where and how we're going to do that.
And Suzanne, when will you know when your meeting is?
I should be able to know by tomorrow.
Oh, great. Okay.
What would you like? I can send out a doodle poll to the board. Do you want to let me know what time frames you want? 4 to 8. What else?
I can just shoot an email with the time frames.
Good.
All right. Anything else other? All right. I think we need a motion then to move into executive session. Is that correct, Peter?
Yeah, I'll move that we go into executive session for the purpose of discussing negotiations.
Second. Great. Second by Mary. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Great. We are officially in executive session.
Brittany, could you stay too?
I'm going to recuse myself. So long, everyone.
Thank you, George.